Hey guys, we're back again, talking more Street Fighter 2.
Oh yeah, we're rounding out our what will be like almost like a trilogy of Street Fighter videos we're doing now. We
Yeah,
really went in on the old Street Fighter. It's just a gift that keeps on giving.
it is. Tell you what, I've had a pretty awesome day because I've been talking about Street Fighter with a certain Boba Hicks, but I had a go at the old Champion Turbo Edition. I wasn't doing too badly. Got up to Vega, or is it Balrog? Who knows? Name confusion. And I was getting right up there, man. Like my skills are getting a bit rusty, but I thought I'll give it a fair crack. But I was doing not too badly, winning some rounds. When what would happen? Oh, Mark, geez, one of them tough kids from the other side of town came in, and he had like cigarettes on him and everything, and I just panicked, man, because it was like.
Epic Badger wins.
Yeah, he's just spinning pole drive me all day, and I might need to go to the hospital and get my neck checked out after that. But welcome to Epic Badger.
Welcome.
Howdy, folks. Hope you're doing well. What would be my signature move? Would it just be like swiping the ground and throwing dirt in
something with
people's eyes?
claws, some kind of clawy thing like Blanca?
Yeah, I'd imagine something that involved, or maybe biting, because badgers once they bite you and get a hold of you, they don't let go. And because it would be a modern video game, everybody online would complain that Badger was overpowered and demand that they release a patch to fix that.
A day one patch. It's like, oh, we know what we did. Well, thanks for having me on. This is great.
Glad to have you, Badger. Glad to have you.
Can maybe talk straight with it.
Yeah, we need an extra pair of eyes and an extra soul to speak on this topic, because we've already chatted about the video game in detail. We also had a wee chat this morning about the live action Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. But we got a whole host of stuff to still get through, whether that be the animated series, the animated movie, the toys. So we figured we better bring in some backup for this one.
Yeah, Street Fighter is a great line because it's one of those properties where it just has so many unique elements that when it lands, it's just ripe for all these opportunities in terms of like animation, movie production, toys. It was this perfect like item that or formula that comes out. It's like, here's all these unique stories and characters, go. So in 1994 it was just like, make everything out of it.
Were you a Street Fighter kid, Badger, or were you in the middle of the hype for all of this?
Yep, I was a Nintendo household. So I had an NES and then later a Super NES, and I did have Street Fighter 2 Turbo. That was the version that I owned. I wasn't good. I mean, I was young, so I couldn't have been that good. I was very much the kid who was like, oh, E Honda has this one move. I'm just gonna do it and just beat the game with it. And then I found out Chun-Li has a similar move. So those are the first two characters for me to beat the game. And it's like, I'd be curious to know, like, did anyone beat the game first time without those two characters?
I'd probably beat it first time with E Honda, and after that was Ken when I learned how to do his timing of his moves and that.
Yeah, it's definitely a learning curve, and like you, Badger, I would gravitate towards character that would have like a repetitive kind of button special, because Blanca had that as well. If you just held down that punch button to do his electrocution kind of hunch. So yeah, any character like that, especially when you're starting out, just break your fingers hitting that button. Set
I love
that
Blanca's
CPU
move.
to easy.
Yeah, I love Blanca's move. You just sit there and you become this electrified ball on the ground, and they walk to you, and it's
Yeah, that skeleton animation, they got good use out of it. Capcom, they use that in a few other games too. I always love it. I'll just
And
bring up
I
our
had
first
I
thing
had to
here.
play with the computer because my sister wasn't into games, and I was kind of the only one in the household. And I lived in a rural setting, so I didn't have a lot of friends who owned the game either.
Oh man, that sucks. You want to be in the arcade and at home. I got to play the arcade version and the Super Nintendo and the Mega Drive version, so I was spoiled really.
You seem to have grown up in like a golden place when it comes to gaming, Johnny, because these
Pretty
arcades and
much.
stuff you got to spend your youth in. It's like a magical land of retro
Yep.
gaming you grew up
Wish I
in.
could go back to the magical land of the arcades and back to that time. Because
Yeah,
now there's nobody to play with.
it's weird that like the closest we had to arcades in my region was you would travel an hour to the city, to big city Reading, and we would go to like a pizza place, and there would be every pizza place in the 90s had like 3 or 4 cabinets. And for a lot of us, that was kind of our only arcade, because I don't think Reading had a traditional arcade at the time. Or if they did, my parents weren't going to take little me to go to it. We'd just go to Chuck E. Cheese or something.
Hmm.
Yeah, a lot of the
I'm
ones
just
over here kind of went hand in hand with pool halls and kind of slot machine rooms. They just kind of lumped them all in as though, if you've got some coins and you need to spend them, go to this general place where you can do that, where you'll find all sorts of ways to lose money.
cool. I'm just going to read the introductory thing, and then we're going to hand over to Badger as we get into the toys in the first section, because he's the expert on that. So in the early 90s, Hasbro produced a series of G.I. Joe action figures based on characters from the popular Street Fighter II video game. These figures were officially licensed by Capcom, the company behind the Street Fighter franchise. The toy line was known as G.I. Joe Street Fighter II. The action figures are based on characters from the game, such as Ryu, Chun-Li, Guile, Blanka, Dalsim, and others. Each figure was designed to resemble its video game counterpart. These figures featured the same level of articulation as traditional G.I. Joe figures, allowing for various posable options. Each figure came with a set of accessories, including weapons and other items that often were kind of strange because they had nothing to do with the character. The figures were typically sold on blister cards with artwork featuring both G.I. Joe and Street Fighter branding, which was a contrast to the Mortal Kombat ones, where Hasbro didn't want to be associated with the extreme violence in Mortal Kombat. They were reluctant to do those figures, but jumped on because of all the instant cash that was rolling around Mortal Kombat was about. The G.I. Joe Street Fighter 2 figures were an interesting crossover between two popular toy lines and video game franchises. They're considered collectibles today and are sought after by fans of both Joe and Street Fighter. These figures represent a unique piece of toy history from the 1990s, when various popular franchises often cross over in the worlds of action figures, comic books, and collectibles. Tell us about some toys, guys.
Yeah, so Street Fighter is interesting. It was a rough time in the early 90s for Hasbro. And
Definitely.
Hasbro had different divisions. Traditionally, well, not traditionally, because they only had Kenner for a few years. They acquired Tyco, which had Kenner in 98, or sorry, 89. Got that switched. So they relied on Kenner for a lot of the movie properties, but they were struggling to find anything to do with G.I. Joe in the early 90s. They were desperate. Kids were really into like Turtles and Power Rangers and X-Men and Punisher, and Hasbro just didn't know what to do. So they were making all these like Battle Core and Ninja Force and Eco Warriors because they had nothing to do with the line. And I'm sure someone at Hasbro thought, well, we need to keep up with G.I. Joe because, well, this little war in the Persian Gulf happened, and they assumed that American kids would be all for like military toys. We weren't. At least me and my friends weren't. We were all for the cool, colorful, silly stuff. The Power Rangers and the stuff like that. So Hasbro was real desperate for anything. So when they acquired the rights for Street Fighter, they did make a smart choice using Hasbro for it instead of Kenner, because, a fighting game, articulation, you want that kind of movement. So it was smart for them to use for Hasbro to do it and not Kenner. And yeah, I had I had a number of these toys. The weird thing is I don't remember asking for them. I don't think I even knew they existed. Because I didn't have a toy seller in my town. We had to go to the city. But I think what happened was my parents knew I played the game Street Fighter, and they saw these on the shelf, and I think these were Christmas toys. So that's probably how I acquired a whole bunch of them in 1 year. But I did have E Honda, which, yeah, Edmund Honda. I keep forgetting that. Yeah, that E stands for Edmund. I had
I've
the
never thought of
Blanca
that.
one. I had that terrible Chun-Li. Hate that Chun-Li. They just reused the Scarlet from the Ninja Force line with that stupid kicking action with the spring in the leg, which you can't do anything with. It takes away the articulation. I've got pieces over here. I'm slowly customizing a Chun-Li. I did the same
Frankenstein
thing
in one
with.
together.
I did the same thing with Ninja Force Scarlet. I took the head because I do like the head with the hair. But I built a custom body for her, and I'm gonna do the same with Chun-Li. But those were
You're
the
right about that.
three.
I was going to say you're right about that. That Chun-Li articulation. I had the same Chun-Li action figure, and you just can't do anything with it. She can't even stand up. And if you use the action figure or use the action feature, even just a few times, it starts to become loose, and even it becomes kind of useless after a while as well. So yeah, she was probably one of the weakest of the bunch.
And one of the mistakes they made, and we'll get to some of these slides, I'm sure, but one of the mistakes that Hasbro, I feel like, made as an adult, looking back at this, they reused a lot of Street Fighter like vehicles and playsets that had already been released in 93 and 94. And so my parents didn't need to buy them because I already had them. But we'll get to that in a bit. I didn't have anyone here. Yeah, and it wasn't because I chose them. It was my parents knew I played Street Fighter, and so they grabbed whatever toys were on the shelf. So it wasn't a line where I got to pick what I wanted, because I would have gotten Guile. And
You
I
don't
probably
want
would have gotten
Ryu or Ken
Zangief.
looking like ninjas for no reason.
Yeah, it's just
At
I
least
didn't
Guile,
have. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, at least Guile fits in with the G.I. Joe aesthetic. Like, I can
Yeah.
see why, even if you weren't a Street Fighter fan, you might be keen to get your hands on him.
Yeah, and I see he comes with the typical in 94, some sort of missile launcher. Because they all
Yeah,
have
it's
to come with that.
gigantic. In the commercial, we see him firing it. This gigantic. It's like bigger than him.
But yeah, they come with weapons. Like Zangief comes with a freaking rifle. Couple of
All
rifles.
sorts. You got some kind of semi-automatic machine gun. And I remember him
And it's
shooting
like,
with me with that in the video game. I died
you,
badly
you
when I
do
got
get
shot.
you do get the feeling that Hasbro did not. They either didn't know what it was, the property, or they didn't know how to turn it
No.
into something. They're just like, well, we have these weapons. Like Chun-Li had yellow weapons. I think probably came with some of the Ninja Force figures. I'm sure they all came with Ninja Force accessories.
The good thing is, at least if you have them, you can not use them and perhaps give some of the weapons to your other Joe figures that might have been missing weapons in it.
Yeah. And I am impressed with the scale of the line, because it's not cheap to make tooling. Even in the 90s, I'm sure it wasn't cheap. But they made a fairly robust line for 1 year's wave. I'm not sure if it was 2 years, but at least for the year that they had it, they
I was
covered like
impressed by
the majority
the
of
Honda
characters.
Blanca just for the body shape that obviously would have had to be in a new buck versus the other ones that could have been reused from other figures.
Yeah. I think, did Honda have the kicking action too?
I'm not sure. I'll go back a
I
slide
thought
and see what with it says. He's got 100. Says he's got 100 hand slaps. I don't know. I've never had it, so I assume there's a spring or rubber band or something in there.
I remember something about him, that there was some feature with him, but I cannot remember.
Yeah, the card says the 100 hand slap, which is this business.
Yeah. So it was something where his arms moved. I just can't remember what they were. And I see he comes with a freaking battle axe and a giant Bowie knife.
Yeah, just so he can decapitate you.
It's like, oh yes, the ancient Japanese sport of just axe fighting in an arena. And the
Can you
silliest
tell
vehicles.
us, Badger, these vehicles, was there more than one? Because these are all like the figures that come with them are like the 2-player colors. Like, did the vehicles come in more than one color or just one color?
I don't think they came in more than one color that I can recall. I know I just remember the Badger, which they renamed for Bison, was always red, and I always saw this in blue. If they did another color, I don't recall seeing it.
Yeah, I've
But
never seen
this
them,
is
so I've
also
only
not a
seen
line I
images online.
actively collect. But I do recognize a lot of parts on this vehicle. Like those missiles came with a number of vehicles. So they slapped a lot of things together.
Was it obvious to you, Badger, when you were kind of growing up and seeing this stuff? Did you kind of recognize, like, oh, hey, that's such and such a vehicle from the normal
Yeah.
line? Or
Yeah, like for example, the Badger, which in the G.I. Joe line it was green, but in Bison's vehicle it's red. I knew what that was. It's like, oh, this one. I don't need it. It seems weird that I don't know, it's just like what vehicles do we have laying around that we could do a palette swap for? Oh, let's use the Badger. Cool, but I'm not gonna want that as a kid because like I already have it unless I'm army building. But as a kid, I wasn't thinking about army building. I was looking for unique toys to play with, and
Yeah,
I prefer
that's
the
it. Like,
green
it's
one.
strange they made those colors, and strange that it didn't do them more unique to make them more appealing. And if you're not army building, it's like, why do you want 'em?
Yeah. Now, if I didn't have the Badger, this does come with some unique characters. Like I didn't have him Bison, so that would be a tempting reason to buy it. It was just very situational whether you would want it or not. Because a vehicle is not something. If you go to the big city once a month, your parents might grab you a Joe. They're not going to pick up a vehicle unless it's like Christmas. Um, so you're not going to want the same vehicle you already have just in a different color. You're going to want a different vehicle for Christmas.
yeah, I always kind of associate army building with more as a kind of an adult collecting habit, as opposed to like when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I always wanted a different thing, a new thing to the thing I already had. Um, it is an odd marketing strategy to use. I wonder, does a lot of it just come down to we just want to spend as little money as possible on
Yeah,
this subline? That's just like because, and I know they've probably reused a lot of parts, but they also maybe spent a bit of money here and there, and they just want to recoup as much of that as possible. So they're just like, just repaint the Badger, just call it this, and like send it out there, and hopefully we'll get enough sales to justify the mold being reused again for the second or maybe third time, depending on what the vehicle is.
Yeah, and I that was such a rough period for toy makers in the 90s. I can't speak much for the 80s. There's like a million channels out there, YouTube channels that could talk about the 80s. But in the 90s, it was just like bam, 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 hitting you over the head with like, okay, right now it's Power Rangers, so I want like these 6 Power Rangers, and then suddenly it's Jurassic Park, and then it was just so constantly changing in these lines that Hasbro and these other toy companies knew that they had to like keep throwing stuff out there because it wasn't going to last long. It wasn't going to be like
yeah,
Masters of the Universe where they knew the line would last at least a couple years after their first successful wave. This was a time period where they were just slamming product out as fast as possible.
yeah. It's
It was
very
also a
uncertain
time with
time.
cheap plastic. Oil prices were down because the world was not as volatile as it was in the 80s. So oil prices were lower. You could get a lot more plastic out there. So there was just so much product hitting the shelves. there's no way like I could keep up. And unfortunately for Hasbro, like the next year, well, no, fortunately for Hasbro, the next year, Star Wars was the big thing. Starting in 94, 95, we started to see a lot of Star Wars product.
I do remember seeing these Street Fighters often on clearance or just not particularly selling where I grew up in New Zealand.
Well, and kids like me too, like it depended on your household. If you didn't have people to play with, it was a game in your library. But some kids just they had it, but they didn't care for it. And so they weren't really going for the line. They wanted things that would match the other toys that they had. It was such a niche toy line that was like it was going to be a tough sell.
Yeah, it was a strange one, and it was like, as you said, it was an uncertain time going early to mid 90s of different toy lines coming about. Hasbro chasing after the boys' market, which had traditionally done well in, but they were floundering and didn't know what they're doing. So they're chasing after whatever trends were around, which is video games were becoming big, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, and of course the X-Men and the comics and animation. They were always behind the times trying to chase what's the next fad or thing. By the time they got to it, the fad was kind of half into it or over, and then they're cranking out these toys and wondered why people didn't buy them.
I wonder if
So
they
tell
had
us about, yeah. Sorry.
if they had decided to not do the GI Joe branding and just let it be its own, not even have like any connotation with GI Joes. Like fair enough, you still keep using those O-ring bodies, and kids might use them and play with their GI Joes and their Street Fighter, but you don't have that actual official association. I just wondered, did it kind of throw people a bit to have GI Joe and Street Fighter side by side on the same branding? Because I know we can take it for granted now looking back, but at the time it is a kind of an odd marriage of brands, and even just to see them together on a card, the GI Joe logo and the Street Fighter logo, it is still a bit odd. It's puzzling.
Yeah.
It's a puzzling strategy because they didn't do that with Mortal Kombat, like Johnny said. Now, in the case of the Mortal Kombat figures, it was because they were afraid of the controversial branding.
Fatalities.
Yeah, but I wonder. I'm sure those Mortal Kombat figures sold well. So, oh yeah,
Got some combat
so
time
yeah.
there.
My Sonya Blade, who I customized because I hate it. She used the Jinx body, which is like I had parts here, but it was just that cloth. Like she was in pajamas with shoes, and it's like, oh, she's gonna defend the Earth realm. So I gave her some leather neck parts, so she actually looks like a combat specialist.
Oh, that's nice.
But
Goodbye.
I think the
thank you,
GI
flippers.
Joe, the GI Joe branding does make sense from a marketing perspective because you're trying to appeal to two groups at the same time. You want the artwork because you want the kids to be like, I want that. But the parents are going to be cautious about buying random stuff they're not familiar with. And parents seeing the GI Joe label, I think, was a mental thing of like, oh, this is a line my kid collects. He always talks about GI Joe, and he talks about Street Fighter. So maybe this makes sense for what I'm buying for my kid. So I'm sure there's a marketing. I'm not a marketing specialist, but I'm sure it makes sense in that regard because you're trying to appeal to the parent audience while trying to appeal to the kids at the same time.
It does make sense in that context because they had, a number of years worth of these like mid 80s relaunched Joes. So to continue on and know that you can also use them with what you've already got makes sense. Tell us about this thing here. Like me, not being a GI Joe person, obviously this is another reuse, but what is this set and what do we do with all these parts?
So there were two sets, and I never saw this one as a kid. This is something I saw much later in life. And just looking at it, I recognize parts like the weapons there, that weird hook missile, anti-personnel something missile. That came from the Mudbuster vehicle. The cannons came from the playset, the electronic playset that came out in 92. Some of this is new stuff though. Like it's not stuff I'm familiar with.
Yeah, and Ken's wearing a weird ninja black costume, which he definitely does not wear in the video game.
No. Was that Is that Ryu in the black and Ken in the
Yeah, he's
blue?
got kind of dark, or you got Ryu in dark blue, and then Ken's like leaping with doing some kind of chop kick thing in the black. And
So
I
they
don't know
got
why they're dressed in black.
so they got it backwards on the cover art. 'Cause-
Yeah, they've it's a very odd looking set. I'm just looking like they still have those kind of star logos like you'd see on just your
Yeah,
average GI Joe. It's weird that they decided to leave that on. And it got
Yeah,
a
and I'm
very
not
kind of cobbled together appearance.
and I just don't see like it's weird calling it like a fortress when it's more of a training ground. And
Platform.
you've got a mixture of good guys and bad guys on there. I think that's I can't the recording symbol is right over that. But who's in that upper left?
you got Vega up the top, Zangief,
So yeah, with
and there's a
Vega and
miscellaneous guy hanging upside down, but I don't know if that's anyone or just a generic artwork. Looks like, or
so
actually, oh
this
no, it's meant to
Like
be Ken based on the colors.
Ryu's
I guess.
Ryu's kicking cardboard or, plywood
Yeah,
cutouts of Blanca and
his
Sagat, which is
tusk
an odd
sticking out
thing.
cardboard.
yeah, so it definitely feels like they didn't know who these characters were, like who were the good guys, who were the bad guys. Is this a
Yeah,
fortress? Is this a training ground? It's so weird. And I don't know. I like to think of my when I look at toys now as an adult, I like to think about how I would play with it as a kid. I don't think I would have played with this. I think this would have just sat in the closet unused.
and it's got those weird colors like the kind of G2 era of Red Decos and Transformers of Joe, where it's like if you had this now, you'd kind of probably might want to repaint it or something. So the colors are kind of weird.
I would have taken off the training dummies because I feel like that just gets in the way of playing.
Hmm. Yeah.
But it's
They
like,
do kind of
what do you
stick
do with
out.
the net? It's one of those play sets where it's trying to tell you how to play, and but when you give it to a kid, it's like, I'm not going to use the net. I'm not going to use the training dummies. It's just going to be a watchtower. If I had the electronic base set, I might set this next to it as a watchtower or something. But there's no value in this in my mind as a kid. I wouldn't have played with it.
It looks like something that would go well with the kind of eco Joe era of things. The whole color setup.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it
Yeah,
doesn't have like toxic waste logos all over it.
well,
That or Captain Planet.
I think that's the same green. Well, it's definitely similar green to the manta ray. That actually looks a little darker. But it looks like the same green as that Mega Marine military vehicle. I'm totally the APC. Yeah,
Never
I
seen
don't
this
know.
place set.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that you never saw this place at retail, did you? I didn't even know it existed actually until Johnny made these slides. I knew about the
Well,
vehicles,
I've
but I
never
never
seen
even
them,
knew they
any
had.
of them, so it's all new to me.
Yeah, it's odd.
I do like that they managed to get in the profile cards. I thought it would just be made up nonsense, like a lot of toy lines where someone's been sent a bit of information, told to do it, and they just make it up. But it's actually fairly authentic to the game. It mentions how Ryu does Shotokan karate and wanders the world and blah blah blah, like Kwai Chang Kane and on Kung Fu. So the profile cards were actually surprisingly decent for the line.
Yeah, and if you were into Ninja Force, having Ken and Ryu in these colors, even if you don't like them, there are more ninjas you can add to the line, or you could take the
Yeah,
heads off and pop in the head of a different character. There's some play value with the figures, and I think they probably would have been better off just selling the two as a 2-pack or something. Give
it's
them
funny you
like
got
a dozen missile launchers.
It's funny you got the Ken and the kind of stealth ninja outfit because like many years later in one of the Alpha series video games, they actually made a character called Dark Ken who was like Evil Ryu, who was just like a pellet swap version. It reminds me of that. So we
I
got
think they
a
were relying on. I think they were relying on the fact that you got these exclusive figures with these vehicles and sets to really sell them. Because imagine you didn't get the two figures with this set. Like, what would you be getting? A platform and an odd training dummy set up with a hole. Like there's just not a lot going on.
Mm.
No,
So
I think.
before
Sorry,
I was just going to say,
if
before we
I'm
move on
thinking,
to the next section, does anything else you want to talk about with the toys in it?
I'm just thinking like if we're
Go
talking
back.
in '94 with Jurassic Park coming out around that time, I think I would have used this more of like a set with that toy line. Like keep your figures high so the dinosaurs can't get to them.
That would work.
Do you have any pictures of the Street Fighter electronic base playset?
No, I couldn't find. This is all the ones I could find. I looked
Okay.
at as many images I could find, and the best ones I could find are these figures and these vehicles. And I did have a quick read through a wiki about the different sets, but I couldn't. It was actually hard to find decent images that weren't even viewable of these sets.
Yeah, it's not something I see very often. Up here it is. Um,
Probably 3D Joe's what might have it, but I didn't want to go ripping off a whole bunch off their site without permission. So
yeah. So I pulled it up here. It's called the Shadaloo headquarters, and it's the 1992 GI Joe electronic base playset. If you want to
can
see
you
what
do
that
share
looks
screen
like,
and with a seal?
yes.
I'll let you. Yeah.
Present, share screen. This is from an eBay listing, so hopefully you can see.
Oh yeah, I can see something here. Hang on, it's coming up.
There
Cool.
it is. I can't zoom in, but yeah. So this is the 92 electronic base playset. 92, yeah. If you know or if you watch Wilhelm Toy and Hobby, I think he has this. And I think he showed it
Always the
off
Joe
on
version of
Instagram.
this.
Sorry?
I think I've seen on Analog Toys the Joe version of this in the regular colors.
Yeah, and I had this playset. So again, unfortunately, that's the problem with reusing big box items like vehicles and playsets is you already have it from an earlier Joe line. There's no way your parents are going to buy it again just for Street Fighter unless
Yeah.
you're a kid who's brand new to the line and doesn't have the stuff from before that. But it's the same playset. I can see M. Bison kicking out the jail cell. So like everything is there.
Like
From the
Balrog
original
with the
playset.
gun
Yeah, and
and
I'm
Chun-Li.
thinking
Yeah.
they did redesign some of the guns, not all of them, but some of the missile launchers they redesigned.
What's it saying? It's got M. Bison at the top in black. It says special edition something something.
Special
Must be a
edition
special
General
Bison
M.
figure.
Bison figure.
So he's actually
he was-
black like those colors.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And if
cool.
you haven't seen this
I'd have that.
playset, that right in the middle of the base on the tower, there's that big silver square. If you push it, the base pulls in and then it collapses. So it's like a strut that's holding it up. So it's just a little play feature where you could have things fall apart. And I think that works with Street Fighter but I don't know. I had it, so there was no way I was ever gonna get this. Because I'd have two of the
it's
same
funny.
base.
It's funny stuff you wouldn't have as a kid, always saying your parents would buy because you already got it. But then when you're an adult, you're looking for all these like variants and what else is cheap that I can get or reuse and repurpose.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm assuming this would be really expensive.
Oh, for sure.
I also like that Chun-Li is just bolting with a submachine gun at her waist.
Yeah, I love it.
In fact, I don't know who's on whose team.
They're just
Because
all over the place. They're all like on the same base, but they're firing at who exactly? Because all the bad guys and good guys are all together.
in the lower right, you have Sagat pointing out that Bison's escaping.
He's
And it's like,
not gotten
wait,
paid this week.
you got T-Hawk firing a bazooka. It's just like, it doesn't make sense.
Ken's just standing there with his melee weapons, but he's got nobody to fight. He doesn't know what to do.
At least Cammy makes sense with a gun because he's meant to be like special forces or whatever.
Who's the dude by Balrog? The shirtless guy.
Are you looking at the right or the left? I think it's maybe is it Fei Long, just based on the fact that he's shirtless. Otherwise, I can't tell who it is.
In a closer up image, he looks Caucasian. So I was like, oh, it can't
Yeah,
be
that's
Fei
what
Long.
that's what they did in most American art. Is they'd take someone who was Asian and make them look like generically American, or draw them like William Shatner or something.
It is a much nicer looking set than the previous one we looked at. Like, it actually looks like something. If you didn't already have the average GI Joe one, you actually probably would want this, because it does look like you can do a lot with it compared to the last set, which was a bit thrown together.
I only just saw the bit where it says official movie fortress. So this was the later line, like the Mortal Kombat, when Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter both had live action movies, and the GI Joe just reused the figures again as the movie versions.
Well, is this? I mean, we'll get to the cartoon. I'm assuming when they say the movie, they're talking about Street Fighter the movie live action.
Yeah, the live action movie. I've
like,
never seen those versions either, but I was reading like some wikis today, and it was saying how they got re-released in other colors. But so that means there must be 3 versions: the original, the 2-player colors, and then the movie ones. But I've never seen the movie ones.
It's just this base has no relation to that movie. Like, okay, Bison has a
absolutely
base.
not.
But like, none of these characters look like the movie characters. The base doesn't look like that. It's just something they slapped on a box.
For sure. We were just talking about the movie earlier, and that base was not in there. They didn't even put a dodgy product place in the background, nothing.
I'll go ahead and stop the screen.
Yeah. I'll take that one out and put the other one back in.
Yeah, it was an okay toy line. I'm sure as a collector today, it'd be something I would want to jump into if I didn't have other stuff that I'm interested in. It didn't appeal to me as a kid because I wasn't asking for it. I had GI Joe, I had other toy lines. Star Wars was just starting to show up. I don't know. It didn't also make sense to give these characters weapons. It's a fighting game. And to me as a kid, a fighting game didn't mean a whole lot to me as a kid. It was just like, okay, here's this game where you can play with other people, and then I ignore it. It wasn't really in my brain until I saw the cartoon later and the movie later.
So we've got just a couple of quick slides on the game before we go into the cartoon. So you can tell us about like which version do you play, or what kind of character, or what was your experiences with it?
I mean, I had the Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I'm looking at the Super Nintendo box or the cartridge. Oh, is that Famicom?
That would be the PAL version because it's got the rainbow colors up there.
Okay. Yeah, I played Turbo. I played it at home. I've only seen at one of the pizza restaurants. I probably saw an arcade, but there was no one for me to fight with. Like no teenager was going to spend their quarters fighting a kid that they'd whip in a second. So I just didn't have a lot of gameplay experience with it until I was much older, and I had other games to play.
Yeah, I was fairly spoiled getting to play the arcades and then playing the home versions as well. And also, it was so popular. We played in the arcades, and we played Super Nintendo and the Mega Drive years after the fact. Even on PlayStation, that would still play them.
I do find it really funny looking back that I was not good at activating any of the combos and the special abilities. Like, eventually I figured out how to do Hadouken. But this was like after I was playing with friends. I was a little bit older. It's like, oh great, now I learn these skills.
Yeah, the combos were famously accidental and not actually programmed on purpose into the game. People found out playing them.
Well, and it's funny because I wasn't good at doing Hadouken in the game, but later when I was playing Mega Man X and a friend showed me how to get the Hadouken, I was like, oh,
yeah, he's
wow.
also got the Dragon Punch in one of the Mega Mans as well. It's another hidden thing.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I forget which one. It's one of the X. I can't tell you which of the X series, but I had a mate, same mate who used to play Street Fighter with, who would play all those X games, and he would blitz through the whole game and go back and you pretty much got to finish it and go back and have the extra high jump and the wall jump and the high jump or whatever, and the dash. and there's like a hidden item that's basically off the screen and lets you do like the Shoryuken Dragon Punch type move with Mega Man. It's not terribly useful in the game, but it's just another cool thing that's in there.
Yeah. I looking at the screen, I remember when I first did E Honda's like piled, whatever you call it, vertical or sorry, horizontal.
Oh, they call it just like sumo headbutt or whatever.
I was just like, what is this? This big dude is just like hovering over the air, but I love the move so much.
Yeah.
I use it all the time.
It's a great move, and like in the earlier games like World Warrior and Hyper Fighting, if you did the light version rather than the hard, it has set a frame or two of invincibility like the Dragon Punch. So anything that tries to hit you at the same time, if you time it right, you can just knock them away. It's very effective.
Now, something that's coming to my mind right now, one of the reasons I loved the game as a kid was how visually stunning it is. I was, growing up in Northern California, and when I say northern, I mean up north, like really far north. I didn't have any experience with culture outside of, traditional American culture in the early 90s for Caucasians. So like this game was showing me like the streets of China and India and Thailand. And it was like countries that I was like, I've heard of China, but like as a kid, this might have been my first experience hearing the word Thailand. I can't recall exactly, but it's just like seeing all these cultures and recognizing like, oh, there's a whole bigger world out there. And this game is bringing that to me. Obviously, these are thoughts of an adult, but as a kid, at least looking at the visuals, I was like, oh, look at all this cool stuff.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
it
because
shows
it
their
is.
production values of what they put in there, and it's like watching foreign films and getting to see something of other cultures that we can't not see in person.
It is a little bit. When me and Johnny kind of talked about it, I suppose you could say that it's maybe a stereotype representation of all these cultures, but especially as a kid, it's a really good introduction. It just to show you all these different environments, because even the music for each stage and the sound of each stage, they kind of like the Indian stage probably being the best example, where you can actually hear elephants in the stage, and it has a kind of very Indian sounding musical theme playing through it. It was just, and like you mentioned, it was probably the first time you ever heard Thailand, and you know, it's like you were learning geography. You're going through all these countries on the map, and it's like, oh, USSR,
Well,
where's that?
thinking back to like when I played Carmen San Diego, Where in the World, it was just like, oh, you're now in Vietnam.
Were you playing
But
the
it's all
text version or like
text.
the graphics version?
Sorry?
Were you playing text version or the graphics version of Carmen San Diego? Because they did a lot of different versions.
I'm pretty sure I was playing the text version.
Mhm.
So it was just like, oh, you're in this country, but then that would be it. But then you play Street Fighter 2 and you're just like, oh, this is cool. It's got temples and it's very green and it's got, you're just looking at Thailand, you're just like, oh, this is looking. And working with, my job is to work with international students. It's stereotypical, yes, but my students are also very connected still to their traditional cultures in a way that Americans don't really have, because we can only bring suitcases with us. And so like, when people immigrate here, our culture is what we've established here, depending on who you are. But like in, there are parts of China where people, yeah, they live in sky rises and, modern cities, but they do have streets that still somewhat look like that. At least when I went to Japan, they loved keeping their historical downtowns and temples, and you still get to see that along with the modern.
Yeah.
So I just think that's cool.
Yeah, it's an awesome looking game with awesome looking environments.
What's
What do we
less
hear?
awesome looking is this cartoon. Well, it looks okay, but some of the stories, man.
Oh,
Yeah.
man. Yeah, I mean, we'll go ahead and read this off and we can jump in.
I really hate reading these walls of text, but I'd figure everyone out there, it's someone's first episode or they don't know about this thing, so give them something, you know. Street Fighter the animated series is an animated television show that's based on Capcom's iconic video game franchise. This series was part of the program on the USA Network. Notably, it didn't play in New Zealand, and I actually messaged another mate, same age, who's always been in Australia, and didn't play in Australia as far as I know either. So it featured in both the Cartoon Express and Action Extreme team lineups. The show ran for a total of 2 seasons, with each season containing 13 episodes. I watched about half of those in the last 24 hours, and somehow I'm still alive. Season 1 premiered in 1995 and Season 2 in 96, resulting in a total of 26 episodes during its run. The series aimed to bring the characters and elements of the Street Fighter games to life in an animated format, offering fans an opportunity to experience the adventures of their favorite characters beyond the video game console. But why would you want to? Because I'd rather just play the game. The show featured martial arts battles, character-driven stories, and ongoing conflict between Street Fighter heroes and their adversaries.
Well, at least it looks
So-
nice.
It
was
does look
surprisingly
good.
decent-looking show. I'm only watching this the first time in the last 2 days because it didn't play here, so I was watching it on YouTube or whatever.
Yeah, it looks good. The voice acting is from character
Shaky.
to character, it varies. The
Yeah.
biggest downside to this show is it doesn't know what it wants to be. So like when we get to
No.
the anime and movie, it clearly knows it's about street fighting, but there's this bigger world stuff happening. This is trying to be a standard, like, you know, good guy hero team. They're supposed to do a little street fighting as a cover, but they're really a military operation. And so they're doing all these adventures. It's so disjointed that there's
Very
no real
formulaic.
story.
And I noticed a couple of things watching the show because I'm seeing it for the first time this week. And, you know, I've watched other animes and Street Fighter comics and whatnot, but not seen this show before. And some of the things I noticed were it's like if you got some people that made Captain Planet and then heard about James Bond and said, let's kind of mash elements of these things together and just see what happens. And we're not going to bother to have much reference material about the actual Street Fighter itself. We're just going to make it a generic Saturday morning cartoon where they're running around as a team. And they're constantly referring to themselves as the Street Fighters, as if that was the name of some kind of special unit or special forces. And even when there's episodes where characters are feeling a bit depressed, like, come on, you're a Street Fighter, you've got to live up to the standards of determination and courage. And all. I'm like, no, Street Fighters are fucking maniac garbage people who go and don't have any values whatsoever. So it's a bit nonsensical when they kind of try and prop them up by going, come on, you're a Street Fighter, as if that's something to aspire to.
Come on,
Yeah,
you're a guy
like-
who fights in the streets for money.
Yeah. They're always wearing I'll just go on to the next slide because I've got some of this is just the opening sequence, some of particular episodes, but this one is just random unconnected images I've chucked in to notice some of the weird repeating motifs and stuff that was going on. So Guile does a sonic boom on average about every 5 minutes in every single episode. So about 3 or 4 times per episode, he'll just go sonic boom and bust it out to some generic goons. Except for the one time in an alley, there's a kid running away from angry mob, like Frankenstein's mob style, and they're going, "Hey, that kid stole my wallet!" And Guile turns around, busts out the sonic boom on a crowd of just civilians in an alleyway, knocks them all over. The guy gets up and goes, "Oh, whoops, my wallet was just in my other pocket," and the kid had nothing to do with it. And he's like, "Oh well," and they will walk away as if nothing happened. That was like bizarre and laughed real hard. In the bottom left, where just you got Blanca and Chun-Li, and that's one of those scenes where they keep going on about being the Street Fighters as if it's some kind of special team rather than a tournament of fighting. Ken and Ryu are very much like the live action movie. They're just like useless idiots who stand around and do virtually nothing most of the time, or make weird bad like dad jokes that just aren't funny, basically like any jokes I do in the start of this show that just completely awful jokes. And then any female character who's in the show basically never has sleeves on, except for the lady at the top left who's in South America, presumably Brazilian like Blanca. They try and cure Blanca and change him back to some guy, whoever he's meant to be in this made-up fiction. And turns out she's some kind of scientist and not like a hula dancing girl or whatever based on that tube top. And in the scene where she's a scientist with the other one, she just puts a lab coat on, but it's completely bare in the middle and hangs down, and you still see the tube top with her bare midriff and everything. So it's like they take the cami model for any ladies in the show, just swap out their heads and change the hair. And probably the strangest thing in the bottom one where it's got Guile and Cammy. And I will say this was a little bit creepy and weird for a Saturday morning cartoon. In every scene where it's got Cammy and Guile, she's basically just begging him, like, do me in the middle of battle and going, oh, you've got such big, strong hands and you've never seen me in a bikini, have you? And some of the lines are quite risque and bizarre for a kid's cartoon. And every time she's like, if she's overly sexualized up here, as in her line readings, not so much the costume. And every time Guile is down here, he just goes, not now, or we're on a mission. And he says it like really awkwardly every time, like he's completely sexless and just bizarre, weird line readings. And they make for a good laugh now, but strange thing to put in a kid's cartoon.
Yeah, it's a weird
Lasted a
one.
long
I
time.
I definitely agree with Ken and Ryu in that they're utterly useless in this show.
You can see the
go
look on their
first, Mark.
face in that image there. They're just like, what are we even doing?
Yeah, no, I really just to echo what Badger was saying, and Johnny as well. They are relegated to, I suppose, flunky level status, where they're just
Yeah.
there to take orders and be plot devices when needed. But it's weird looking at. I rewatched a couple of episodes in myself just in preparation for when we were having this chat, and yeah, look, I will give it props. The animation mostly does look nice, and it is very
Yeah, it's a
of the
decent character
time.
model.
Like, and it looks a lot like, Cadillacs and dinosaurs and a lot of those other kind of 90s shows that were airing at the same time. But like Badger was saying, it just does not know really what it wants to be, or if it does know what it wants to be, it definitely has a hard time translating that vision onto screen, because yeah, this whole like the Street Fighters and Team Street Fighter, and it's
They
it's
constantly yell
very
it out. It
bizarre.
reminds me of the Mortal Kombat cartoon, how Sonya's always going, combat time. Like his guy was always doing a sonic boom, and they're always going on about the Street Fighters, the Street Fighters.
Yeah, and it makes sense if you're gonna have a lead character. Guile is a good lead character because he's a military man.
Mhm.
He's good at giving orders. He can manage an organization. So it makes sense to make him a lead rather than Ryu or Ken.
Yeah.
But then you need to go a little bit harder on the military side. And they kind of do with.
They're more like
But
the
you don't
Eco
see the
Warriors
US.
again. Like they're bizarre.
Yeah, but they go real hard, weirdly enough, on like MI6 or whatever the British special. I can't remember what they were in the show, but like they're
Well,
really
it's pretty
the
much
only.
James Bond. Like, what is
Yeah.
that element?
Yeah, it's Cammy and her squad. And Cammy, yeah, I just can't stand her too much in the show. She's that big-eyed, pouty kind of character. She becomes a damsel in distress constantly in the second season. To where it's just like I don't want her on screen because then the whole episode devolves into trying to go after her and help her.
Yeah.
I
love the scenes from this episode where E Honda's trying to, I don't know, like look up or hack something online, and it turns into this weird, like abstract cubist MTV thing. But when you're looking at it from a distance, you just see his hand moving in the computer, and this kind of naked man. It looks like he's just sitting there masturbating while they're all watching him when the scene comes in.
It's interesting what roles they take on, because as an organization, you need experts to do things. Well, okay, then I guess we'll make
punch keys with ham hands.
Well, he's a computer specialist. That's his role in this.
Computer explodes because he's ham-handed it so well.
And DJ is the helicopter pilot. And it's like we need
Yeah,
to
I
give
love
these
that. I love
characters
he's
roles.
just randomly a helicopter pilot. At least he's gotten away from Bison's Shadaloo in the live action, where he's always sitting there punching keyboards and stuff in the movie.
But it then makes Ken and Ryu dumber in that, like,
Yeah,
okay,
they're
one's a
real
computer
himbo
specialist,
characters.
one's a helicopter pilot, one's a military man. What are these two for? Why are they here? If we're not going to focus
Two
on the
random
street
martial
fighting, they
arts
don't.
guys. That when people are all the way across the yard firing machine guns and laser pistols, they'll throw a fireball or do a fucking kick at you.
Yeah, it's just they needed to pick a lane and they couldn't, and then you just have these characters who are the comedians, I guess, is what their role was
Yeah.
relegated to.
There was another great scene with E Honda. I don't have the image in, but it was one of my favorite scenes. M. Bison lands in a helicopter, and E Honda's like probably a good like 100 meters sprint away, and they're not in any range where they can physically come into contact. And from all that distance, he starts doing the 100 handshake, just slowly walking over there like this while they're firing laser pistols at him. It's not a good tactic.
Yeah, they go some weird places in this show. Oh, did you want to talk about this?
This is another amazing scene, and this one I've got a whole bunch for comedic effect because I love this scene. This is possibly one of the best things I've ever witnessed in my life. So they go. It turns out Fei Long, who's obviously based on Bruce Lee, it turns out the guy who was like producing his films is some sort of drug lord using all sorts of criminal funds to fund the movies. And when Fei Long finds out, he goes with Guile to the big chemical factory where they're making all these illegal drugs. And you never know what kind of drug it is, but it's a big factory. There's lots of barrels. And earlier in the episode, Fei Long, who's Chinese, says to Guile, just randomly, with no context, can you teach me about chi powers or something like this? And like chi is a Chinese concept, and he's asking Guile, the American military man, it makes no sense. And he just throws that line out, and they don't say anything about it. And later on, Guile's doing sonic booms again. Ryu and Ken throw their fireballs. Fei Long's doing like his upper flaming kick from the game, but it doesn't have all the flashy effects. And he's kind of practicing it and does a little spark. And Guile's like, you almost did the cheese, something. And later on, he does it properly. So he's like, in the scene, he's kind of mastered this like flaming kick. And where do you want to let off your flaming kick? You want to go into the big chemical barrel drug factory, do a flaming kick that sets everything on fire, everything starts exploding. He floats around for nearly 10 seconds up in the air all over the screen like this, like a helicopter. And then Guy was like, we should probably get out of here because everything's on fire and we're all kind of burning alive. It's one of the
Guile
best
is
scenes.
like, I could just set a C. Guile's like, I could just set a C4 charge and we could be like a mile away when this goes off.
This is just like Chuck Norris or Arnold in the 80s movies, but you would set your charge, get out, then explode it, not while you're still inside the bloody building, is what they do. So it all goes up, the barrels are going off, there's flames, there's multiple explosions, and then in the next part of the scene, they do it, show them evacuating some of the people, including the criminal boss that Fei Long's carrying there. But as they go off into the distance, but no one's like, let's stop this crazy big inferno fire. We just drive off in a military truck and leave the whole place to explode and burn.
No, this won't cause an ecological...
my favorite scene in the episode.
Yeah, it's just like, this won't cause an ecological issue when the flames spread out to the forest.
He's not happy.
Oh, this was such a weird show, though, because, like, okay, we're trying to fight bad guys, we're trying to fight terrorists. Then you have episodes that are super serious, like with Chun-Li, when she has a choice between, like, defeat M. Bison or watch, what was it? It was a chemical plant or a nuclear power plant. It was going to go down and kill a lot of people, and Guile had to bring her back from the brink and be like, no, Lee Bison, we got to save the people in your hometown. So dark stuff like that. But then you have later episodes where Blanca runs into a freaking alien in the jungle, and it's like, oh, they gave up.
And they try and
If
cure
I had
Blanca
to
one
guess,
episodes. He changes like Hulk style back to a man.
I'm guessing this show though took the format of other kind of 90s and 80s ones before, where
Yes,
they probably switched
absolutely.
writers fairly often. So depending on who you've gotten as that episode or that week's writer could depend on whether or not you're watching something with a little bit of soul or something that's just completely ridiculous, like an alien in
Yeah.
the forest.
It's so
Well,
disjointed episode to episode.
yeah, and that's where you need a central plot, like a focus, because your
Hmm.
writers are like it's just devolves into episode of the week. And as a writer, it's like, well, what do we talk about? Like, okay, this character has a grudge against Bison because her father was killed. So we'll do an episode on her. That's easy. How do we introduce Fei Long? How do we introduce Blanca? And can we
By
talk
having
about
him
Blanca's
fly in the
voice
air,
actor?
the exploded chemical factories, how you always introduce characters.
Can we talk about Blanca's voice actor? Because I know voice
It's weird. He's
acting
like,
is
I'm Blanca, rah, rah, rah. The voice is so like weird and growly.
voice acting is rough on the throat. And that's why voice actors today are
Yeah.
trying to unionize and trying
He
to
does
get
the
all these
Wolverine
changes.
voice.
Yeah, and it's like I can't imagine your throat's gonna feel good after doing a couple episodes of this.
No way. Like the Blanca one, like he's absolutely like real guttural and it's not a particularly good sounding voice either. So and yet it would most likely would have hurt the guy's vocal cords doing it.
Yeah, all that effort just for a quite unimpressive someone. Like, yeah, it doesn't.
The voice
Yeah, he
takes
just
you out of the
sounds
show
weird,
actually.
Blanca. It does. It does. It just does not suit him. He talks too much anyway, as it is.
Yeah, he talks way
Like, I'm
too
more
much
used
for
to.
a beast man.
Yeah, he
He's
should just be
constantly having
growling and
monologues
slobbering.
and
Yeah, it's too
they
much.
have
Too
him
much dialogue.
in the episode where he changes back to human, he's wearing like the vest that Charlie/Nash is wearing later in the Street Fighter Alpha series. In certain versions, they connect Blanca to being, like in the live action movie, to being one of Guile's friends or military guys, but it's not really proper Street Fighter canon. It's just stuff they made up. But I just found it bizarre that he was wearing this exact same vest as later military Guile's friend character in other games that had nothing to do with this.
Yeah, I think in the movie it was Charlie, who's a Street
Yeah,
Fighter character who came out later, and Charlie became Blanca in the movie.
yeah.
So at least
It's
they
just
didn't
a
do something
nobody in
weird
the
like
movie.
that. But it's just it's a show that should have been good, but they didn't understand the source material. They didn't
No
pick a
way, they
lane.
did not.
They didn't know what to do with it, and so they just had to keep doing these weird episodes, and there's no reason for me to go back and watch the next week.
Mm. Yeah, if they had like follow the source material a little better, or I don't know, they probably had. Most shows have kind of like some kind of show Bible reference material. I'm guessing their reference material would have been just images or the video game. I doubt they got anything as far as story other than this guy as a military man and Chun-Li, Bison, because there's so little actual character development. It's virtually non-existent other than the one sentence descriptions you get off the back of the action figures.
Yeah, I just pulled up a
Yeah.
quick list of cartoons because this was 94, I think, as well.
Yeah.
I just pulled up a quick list of what cartoons it was competing against because at
So
least in the
many.
US at this time, we had syndication. We had this system of your local TV provider would pay to own properties to play on its television. So where you lived in the US decided on what shows you got to watch.
Yeah.
And they would look, your TV stations would look and see which ones were popular with families and kids.
Batman was out when this was going.
Yeah, and they would pay to get that license. And if the show wasn't doing well compared to other shows, they wouldn't pay money to air it. And at this time we had Gargoyles, we had Reboot, Street
Fantastic show.
Sharks, Carmen Sandiego, The Tick, Spider-Man, Real Monsters. It was just like if you're running a television, syndication studio and it's like these shows are getting lots of audiences. This show sucks. We're not going to pay money to air it. So
They're going to
it
get the
didn't last
bargain
very long.
basement prices on this show.
Yeah, it wasn't gonna last long. There was just too much other good stuff out there. Like,
Yep.
can you imagine this
It's
standing up against the Spider-Man animated series?
no, no way. Great show. I watched it all again this year. That and X-Men. I watched them right through again.
I did very stiff competition. And I suppose as well, like a lot of other cartoons at the time, they were kind of somewhat limited in what they could do anyway, because the rules were always getting tighter and tighter, especially if the Parents Television Council had their way when it came to,
Yeah.
perceived violence in children's
Mhm.
cartoons. So you're kind of in an awkward position where you've got a show that's called Street Fighter, but you're probably going to try and make an effort to not make it too violent. So the name in itself almost doesn't go with what you're trying to
They,
portray
they
on screen. You're trying
they
to
do a
keep it
bit
as
better than
clean as
Mortal
possible.
Kombat as far as actually doing their moves and that. So it's, at least in that way, it makes a bit more sense because they're not killing each other or doing fatalities. They can do their special moves.
Yeah. And this was a time in which once again Congress was talking about television and children and violence, because I know at this time um not Saban, who I can't remember the lady's name who worked at Fox, but she brought Power Rangers to the US, or worked with Saban to bring it here, and she had to go to Congress around this time to be like, no, but Power Rangers is great because you have this diverse cast of characters and it teaches lessons. It was just that time in which you had to tone down the violence for anything kid related. So like no one could die, no, you couldn't use guns really. Everything had to be lasers.
Yeah, the laser thing was always particularly noticeable, I thought, in cartoons. That's why I think Batman, the animated series, always stood out to me, because they used actual guns that fired bullets as opposed to the typical laser beams you're used to seeing in these other 90s shows.
Yeah, in these shows, like, you hit a character, they'd fly a few feet and hit a wall and be like, I'm okay. In the Batman animated show, it was like Batman would beat people down. They'd be like, okay, I'm done. I'm just gonna stay here until the police arrive.
And yet they were praised for that because it won awards, and like, it was almost it got a kind of a free pass when it came to that type of stuff, because it was quite a gritty show. Like, especially if you were to compare the Street Fighter cartoon to Batman the animated series, it's literally night and day. Like
Yeah,
the
I
tone
think
doesn't even come close.
I think because they were through like Warner Brothers, who that's the production company behind the thing. Um, but then it got sold into syndication as well. They had some kind of standard as far as how they produced it, but they still had to communicate with like the what do you call it, standards and practices and all that, and getting notes and all that sort of change this and tone that down. But it did really push the bar as far as animated screen violence, and it was meant to be from the beginning an all ages show. They weren't trying to do like a 70s Batman Super Friends or anything. There's no laser vampires on this show.
Yeah, it was just a different time.
Yeah. And was it so? I guess the question for both of you. So, looking at Guile being the lead in this, um, like you had to look at always from the perspective of America first when it came to these shows.
America.
Like every city would be an American city. Every leader would be this blonde hair American dude. It's like you had to always look at from our perspective, even though we have a lot of similarities culturally, but you always had to look at from like what my country had to decide. And if my government decided we're not going to have this or we're not going to have that, that reflected what you had to watch a lot of the times.
Mm.
Yeah, definitely. But it was so normal for us. Like, we didn't think anything of it. And so much of our media was American media anyway. So, and look, it's often kind of joked that Ireland is like, the extra state of the United States. We were kind of heavily influenced by you guys anyway. But yeah, it was just, I never really, it wasn't until I got a bit older and you kind of look back and it's like, yeah, I was watching a lot of like pro-American, almost like, high propaganda, patriotic messages, but a lot of it was kind
Yeah.
of just going over my head. I just thought that was just the way it was. It's like, it's an American show, so it's going to be, yeah, like you said, everything's going to be from an America first point of view. It's not going to be Eurocentric or Asia-centric. My little cat here is telling me she wants to go out, so I'll just drop out for 2 seconds.
Yeah, I watched Rambo: The Force of Freedom, and I was proud to be an Australian, New Zealand American.
Yeah, and our portrayal of other people, like the whole British squad on this cartoon, just you listen to how they talk, and it's like, oh man, that's how we imagine British people would be.
Outfits are like 90s X-Men or something. They got weird outfits and half cyborg looking guys.
And of course, like you have your female characters. Your Chinese representation would be Chun-Li, and your British representation would be Cammy. So of course, like Guile is going to be, well, Guile doesn't flirt with Cammy. It's the other way around. But it's just like from Guile's point of view, it's these ladies always around him, and that represents the world. And then for your Brazilian, you have someone who's completely made up as a green dude.
Green Man, Hulk.
And then you have Ken and Ryu, who are, well, Ryu's supposed to be Japanese, isn't he? Yeah, but he's
Supposed to be.
not. I can't remember how he was in the show.
A lot of the artwork of that era too, promotional stuff, he does not look Japanese because you get American versions of the anime art and they don't look right at all.
Yeah. But you don't want too many like male characters to be competing with Guile. So it's like, oh well, Chun-Li is obvious, as a support character, but then you have Cammy as a potential love interest, and it surrounds it. It keeps Guile the focus, where it's like this green monster, these ladies, these two idiot comedians. It's just Guile is the American who's front and center, and everyone revolves around him.
That's it. Well, we'll move on to our next section away from this TV show into more Street Fighter animations. So they did the animated movie, which is like a proper anime thing. Also 1994, same year we also got the live action movie. So they were just cranking out Street Fighter merchandise left and right, and there was various comics and other stuff, and there was so much Street Fighter stuff. You got toys, you got animated movies, TV show, live action movie. Just it was probably too much too soon as far as merchandise rolling and all that.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of this we didn't see until much later growing up.
Yeah,
so like
this was a real
movie
rental market thing in the late 90s, not so much when it was out. It kind of took off.
Yeah, when kids who were my age, we were a little more teenagers, before we saw Street Fighter 2, the animated movie, unless your parents rented it from the movies, store, thinking it's a cartoon like the ones they were watching on the show.
And it was rated about 15, or 16, depending on what region you're in.
Yeah, they didn't used to really be too strict with the age ratings over here back then. I remember I actually watched it, I think, in 95 or 96 when I was still below that 15's age limit. I'm pretty sure they had no problem renting it to me in the
You must have loved that blood then at the start.
Oh, straight away, I knew I was watching something special and probably something I shouldn't be watching too, which made it extra enjoyable.
Yeah, you shouldn't have been watching this. You should have been playing Mortal Kombat in the arcade, seeing decapitations and heart rips.
Violence, no matter what direction you turn. What a time to be alive.
I do think that worked in Street Fighter's favor because parents were less likely to tell kids to not play Street Fighter or not look into the merchandise, whereas Mortal Kombat, it had the advantage of having an older audience, but you lose out on a lot of marketing and merchandise on the kid side because of that. So it's a little give and take. Street Fighter is much more palatable to a lot more people. And it was just easy to make all
put their cigarettes out, weren't going off and buying the Mortal Kombat shows.
This movie, though, I have to say, I am a big fan, and still to this day, it holds up. It stands up.
Yeah, it does.
They use a similar framework of what we've kind of seen already in terms of trying to hush Guile as a lead, but they managed to achieve that without sacrificing Ken and Ryu as heroic characters. One thing I'll say about this movie is that it treats each character with the level of respect you'd kind of expect them to have based on how they were, used in the game or perceived in the game. So there'll be some characters who are only in the movie for a couple of minutes, but you don't get annoyed about that. You're happy enough just to see them. They've given them a brief role to move the plot along or whatever, and it just works.
Mhm.
And then you don't end up kind of losing out. Like I was saying, like Ken and Ryu, both are still pushed strongly as main heroes. They have no problem kind of sharing that spotlight with Guile and Chun Li. You don't just feel like you're sacrificing two in order to push two. They seem to have just got the balance right with getting all your hero characters to kind of go on their own little adventures independently of each other before all coming
Yeah.
together for the grand finale, which works out really well.
Yeah, and I
Well
appreciate that
balanced.
this movie kept the spirit of street fighting. Like everyone is, a lot of these characters are out to improve themselves and challenge each other, and they want to do that. And Bison's whole plan is trying to find the best of these street fighters. So it keeps that element in the movie. So it's like, okay, this was an appropriate way to have street fighting with this bigger grandiose story involving Bison, whereas the animated cartoon could not do that, and the
Yeah, it's a
movie
good
couldn't
balance
either,
of the
really.
different characters and different plots and stuff while staying true to the source material.
They
Yeah,
make
and I also like that
excellent.
it starts with Street Fighter 1. The very
Yeah, it
beginning is
technically
like,
does because it's Sagat. We're getting a
yeah,
scar.
it's like, what happens in the first game? Oh, this one event happens right at the end. Cool. Now we can
Yeah.
jump into Street Fighter 2. It feels like it makes sense with the game itself.
Actually, that reminds me. I won't derail the stream, but in some of the other episodes of that TV show we're watching, they randomly just chuck in all sorts of characters from the Alpha series on a TV in the background. There's like Sodom Guy, Adon, who's also in the very first Street Fighter, and Birdie, but it's the Alpha Birdie version, not the Street Fighter 1 version, where he's big and chunky, not the skinny version. So it's strange how it jumps around. So I'll move on to the next one here. So opening sequence, we get Sagat versus Ryu. We get Cammy, who's like assassinating some, I don't know, political figure or whatever. It's in broad daylight. Presumably it's when she's, brainwashed as an assassin because she's meant to be a good guy. And then we get Chun-Li looking at lots of computer screens and intel about our bad guys. And you can tell we're gearing up for some kind of mission and different people and forces against each other.
They definitely set a far more serious tone than it's what's set in both the live action movie and the animated series. I think that's probably another thing that goes in this movie's favor is they treat it as an event and as an adventure and something that's going to be an epic journey while you're following these characters on their mission to destroy Bison. And I just think it works out really well. I think a nice touch in this animated movie is the fact that Bison is using these cyborgs to track down the fighters.
Yeah.
So you get lots of these nice little screens where the
Like the
cyborg is
Terminator,
analyzing the various fighter, and yeah,
Robocop.
you get to see, oh look, he's got power level 90 or whatever. It shows all these different stats, which
Or
it kind
Dragon
of
Ball
ties it
Z with
back
the
to the
scouters over 9,000.
yeah, I just love it because it just kind of brings you straight back into that video game mindset. And I just think it's a nice little kind of, olive branch there just to the gamer fans. If that was what your main kind of interest was in the Street Fighter series, at least there's a little something in there for them as well.
I like how he flies in this, I don't know, jet aircraft, Black Hawk looking thing, and then he comes down the stairs, very fascist Darth Vader style, like, Imperial March, and all that.
Yeah, Bison is really, really well portrayed in this movie. They did an
Oh, he's
excellent
awesome.
job of he's a proper, fascist dictator, drug lord. He just wants to find the ultimate
Superpowers.
fighter.
Yeah, and I another issue I had with the cartoon was Bison lost his mind all the time. Was he trying to rule the world or was he trying to destroy it? And there were several times he tried to destroy it. In this one, no, he wants to be in charge. He wants to have all this power. and it's like, I don't know, the stakes are high, but they're consistent stakes. And I appreciate that about a villain who's like, he's got his own army and he's got his, his base and all his spies, and he just feels intimidating rather than just being a weirdo who can't make up his mind.
Yeah.
He wakes up one morning, he's like, am I going to destroy the world or am I going to buy a Starbucks? I don't know.
And like tonally in this one, the Bison, you can see, he's like a ruler or a leader. He's got all these underlings, he's got scientists, he's got bloody Balrog and Sagat and all that. He's not getting his hands dirty if he doesn't have to. He's like the boss of something, get my minions to go out and do something for me. But in the TV cartoon, he's mixing it up with the Street Fighters every other episode. It's like he doesn't have any employees to actually do things for him, other than the generic goons in the the kind of combat masks and whatever.
Something about the goons, because when you were talking about Street Fighter the movie, I thought it was funny when when Zangief had his great line, like, "We're the bad guys." Because when you watch the cartoon, when you watch the movie, just some characters constantly change sides, and you don't always know which side they're on.
Yeah.
So like Balrog and Zangief rotate allegiances often.
Yeah, I thought it was silly because I love Zangief and Blanca are probably my two favorite Street Fighter characters, and neither of them are meant to be bad guys.
I love these flashback moments that you see of Ken and Ryu training together throughout the movie that really helps establish that kind of long-standing relationship between the two of them. It's an excellent soundtrack to this movie as well. It's really nicely composed
Yeah, soundtrack is good.
orchestral music, as well as some 90s rock like Alice in Chains, and you've got Korn and stuff. Like it's a very impressive soundtrack for the time. But yeah, dude, the flashbacks between Ken and Ryu, I think it is really special, and I like how, as a viewer, you kind of find out how Ryu got his little red headband. They have that flashback where Ken
Yeah, it's
accidentally
cool.
cuts him open during the sparring, and then he takes his own red hairband off and ties it around Ryu's cut. I don't know what that
I
says
like
about
that
Ryu though. Does he never removed that band in like 10
yeah, it's
years?
just
Pretty
full blood
it's
stain.
pretty disgusting.
I like they have those flashbacks through the movie. I like that they're brief and not an entire bloody series, because they did all sorts of stuff after this that's not great. And the movie gives you cliff notes of just little hints of stuff. But some of the later shows, the full anime shows, are fairly boring to watch.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's
Street
interesting.
Fighter. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say on Johnny's point that the Street Fighter Alpha movies go a bit too far into that training past and stuff, to the point where you don't really need to. It just becomes superfluous. Like, I don't really need to know that much about these characters. Like, it's
Yeah.
great that I've learned that there's this established relationship, but what you give me in this movie is probably enough. We don't need to scratch too much deeper.
Yeah,
I love this sequence here where Ryu headbutts the guy and it sees he knocks his tooth out and his nose is just like caved in. It's so nasty.
Very violent.
and some parts of this movie carry over later, like Ken meeting his future wife before they have a child, and that carries over into the later games where he's a family guy and he's got to decide, do I stay with my family or do I go fight? And so this movie has a lot of elements that get carried over into the other games later on.
Brilliant
Indeed it
fight
does.
between Ryu and Fei Long as well. Very
It's-
intense battle.
It's also nice to see a real difference between Ryu and Ken. Because in the cartoon,
been
they're just
generically the same.
a bumbling pair. In the movie, they're a bumbling pair. How are they different from each other? And the movie goes into detail. Like, Ken lives this very different life than Ryu does.
Yeah, Ken's like 70s Chuck Norris competition fighters, going around doing stuff, and Ryu's like quite Kane and Kung Fu, like old David Carradine, just wandering the earth and having adventures, kicking in windows apparently.
Yeah, Ryu definitely is the wandering warrior, whereas Ken is like a complete celebrity. You know, driving his Porsche, has a beautiful fiance. You know, lives in a big mansion. He's just living the life. Where here's poor Ryu walking barefoot from town to town and country to country with his bag full of whatever. Just fighting on the streets and improving himself.
I wonder what's in that
With this,
bag because he's always carrying it and he never changes his clothes or washes them. So is it just another identical outfit, maybe?
it's just
I
laundry
think he's a lot
soap.
of cash. Yeah,
Whenever
keeping it
he's
whiter than white.
I do like this side profile you captured of Guile and DJ. It
Yeah.
just reminds me of who's that really well-known comic book artist who can't draw human
Rob
proportions.
Liefeld doing the Captain America.
Yeah.
It's actually that famous image is taken from Arnold Schwarzenegger where he's posing sideways and puffing out his chest for a bodybuilding pose. And people have gone, oh, it's impossible. Why does he look like this? I'm like, if you're standing in a neutral stance, yes, it is impossible. Your chest only goes out like that if you thrust your shoulders back and arch your chest so your whole rib cage is coming out for a static pose. It's not something that's not works in a dynamic way like Captain America leaping about, which is why it looks so crazy.
Yeah, there's an incredible sequence here where Ryu kind of foils. Well, he actually doesn't foil. He just essentially ends up kicking the shit out of a load of would-be assassins that kind of took out this Indian
Yeah,
politician.
there's like a little kid or
Um,
something's going to get hit by them in the crossfire, run over, and he's like, no, fuck that, and just kicks the window
yeah,
and
it was
stops the
too
guy.
much. It was too much for the good man Ryu to stand, so he had to
Yeah.
like. It's pretty impressive though. He does this leaping kick where he like gets the guy straight through the window, and like he really kind of fucks them up. Notice there as well in the very, very first frame here, we see Akuma
Yeah, I
chilling
put that in
against
there.
the wall. It's
Little
his
goofy
only appearance
Akuma.
in the movie. It's just a nice little cameo. I thought that was a nice touch.
It's cool because in the storyline, he's not involved in any of it, in any of the versions of the fiction. He's exists in the background, but it's nice that he just pops out there. The bottom bit is when uh, Guile and Chun Li go to see DJ, and he's only briefly in the film too, but we see these like cyborgs that are robot things that are like these drones observing the fighter power, and Chun Li like does a big like round kick and kicks the head off one of them. And DJ didn't know he was being watched, and then we get Las Vegas where there's a very brief fight with Blanca and Zangief, but it's I don't know, it's cool to see them in the movie. And we better cover up those naughty images down there in case anyone's watching at home.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
that scene of Chun-Li just doing the spin and knocking the head off the android.
Yeah,
It's like, no, these are spies. Look, and just
yeah.
wipes the head off of one. And
Just
it's like,
whack.
if you had made a mistake, you would have taken a man's head off.
Yeah, that's
I would
true.
have broken a man's neck.
But the
Like,
I
fight
actually,
with
ignore the guy around the outside of the block we did that to first. Don't go over there.
it's so funny though, the cyborgs, because they look almost human except for this massive robotic one side of their
Yeah.
face with a giant camera lens.
But he is wearing a hat, Mark.
Of course, of course. If it's good enough for the Ninja Turtles, it should be good enough for the cyborgs, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, they're more convincing than the turtles are playing here.
I love the
It's,
fight with Zangief and Blanca because it's this. There's street fights like the one with Dulcim and Edmund Honda. I love just saying the name. It's just in the alley. We're not in an alley. It's in a little courtyard. But then you have other street fights, built up ones, because Zangief is a performer. He's not just a dude who wants to fight you in a street. He wants to put on a show. And I love that he does that with Blanca.
I just love that Blanca bites them like in the game.
Yeah, it's for the entertainment of the Shadow Law crime syndicate or whoever it is they're performing. Because of course, if we did live in a world,
club or whatever,
you would probably find that there'd be a lot of these like illegal street fights among these kind of super powered martial artists. Especially, I'd imagine the capacity for illegal gambling is off the charts with these type of fights.
Yeah, we'll move on to
Who you
the
got?
next
The
one.
pro
The
wrestler or the
uncensored that
mutant green
frame there.
guy?
Pause it at home before we go on. Move on to this one.
What a fight as well between Vega and Chung Li.
Vega.
Apart from titillating us, no pun intended, prior to the actual fight itself, but it's a great piece of action. I absolutely love this fight sequence
Yeah,
between
it's a
Vega
cool
and Chung
fight.
Li.
Vega looks awesome.
Intense.
The guy was like
He's
speeding
got
across town to try and help Chun Li because he knows something's going to happen, but not exactly what.
yeah, it's a pretty actually. The first time you watch the movie, you kind of are almost worried for Chung Li because they do this
Yeah,
whole preamble of kind of Vega actually sneaking into the apartment and he cuts the cord to the phone line so
it's
Guile
like a
can't call
serial
her. It's
killer
like,
horror thing.
oh yeah, this guy is gonna like murder her in her bed, and it's just by pure happenstance that she notices a little breeze flickering a candle or something, and she just dodges his
Yeah.
strike. And of course,
You get
Bison
more.
getting his hands on Ken here to brainwash poor
Yeah,
Ken.
brainwash them. That's definitely a big part of the Street Fighter lore is like Bison brainwashing people because they brainwashed Cammy. I think they call them like the dolls or something in the Alpha series. And there's lots of characters that get brainwashed and all sorts of horrible stuff going on in the background. And you get the Ken Ryu, another flashback where he's like helping him. He's like falling off a cliff and grabbing him. And Ken's like having these flashbacks while he's getting brainwashed. It's mucking up his memories about Ryu, changing them from this is my friend to this is a guy I'm going to have to fight in the next scene.
Yeah, it's a good way to pair them up in a fight. It's like, well, I can't get this guy because he's mentally blocking me from knowing who he is, even though I can literally see him on television. Anyway, it's just like, okay, well, he's got this other guy, same power levels, same techniques. Oh, he would work just as well. And now you have an evil version, and now that whole backstory they lead with comes back in the movie later on. So it's like it's a good setup and payoff.
The dynamic works really well, I think, and because it's funny if you were probably to compress all of the flashback scenes together, it's probably only maybe less than 5 minutes, maybe at a
Yeah,
push
very
5.5
short.
minutes. But it feels like you're constantly reminded throughout the film. They'll always give you a quick 20 seconds or a quick 30 seconds of flashback, and it always just plants the seed in the back of your mind that there's a very deep kind of issue between these two. Because I suppose we haven't really mentioned it, but there is I suppose, for want of a better term, a professional rivalry between Ken and Ryu. Like Ken
Yeah,
clearly has a chip on his shoulder that Ryu is capable of beating him, which is what kind of Bison latches onto when he's brainwashing him. He sees that as a weakness, and it's I don't know, maybe you guys would disagree, but do you think when everything is said and done, because so I know we're getting ahead of myself a bit, but we'll go back to it, I'm sure. Does this movie kind of establish that Ryu is actually the best? Like he is better than Ken at the very least, and probably better than all the other Street Fighters? Because I think when we finally get down to the fight after Ken has come back around and him and Ryu are teaming up to fight Bison, like Ken gets disposed of relatively quickly, and it's actually Ryu who's able to land all the blows that initially first topple Bison, which causes him to even make the remark that nobody had actually ever toppled him before, and he clearly underestimated how powerful Ryu is. So I suppose I'm just kind of thinking, is the movie kind of trying to hit you over the head with the fact that actually Ryu, he is just the best of the best? Like that's why, he will beat everybody eventually.
Yeah, because all the other properties treat him as just a sidekick or a buddy to Ken. This is, I think, the first property that really sets down the rules that will get carried on in later games to say, no, Ryu is, there's something unique about this guy. He is really powerful.
you can do laser fireballs in Marvel vs. Capcom, man. Watch out for that guy. Yeah, they do kind of play into more of the stuff in later games, particularly the Alpha series too, where like here Ken gets brainwashed, and it's like he's unhinged or got no morality or limits. So he's going to like just fight even without any regard for his own well-being. And in later games, well, Alpha 2, we get evil Ryu, or he's like using like the same kind of, they call it like, what do they call it, Dark Hoodoo or some nonsense like Goki. It's like it's like Star Wars. It's like the good side of the Force, but using Force lightning, evil side of the Force sort of deal, where Ryu has this potential to be like this amazingly powerful fighter. So we do get hints of that here, but also I guess somewhat how much does he hold back, or is he in check that he doesn't go down the evil path? Darth Vader, Anakin style, is that the result of his potential?
Yeah, it's
and you have to do something with Ryu, because Ken gets this whole life that he gets now that gets carried forward in the game. So it just makes sense that you have this lone wanderer. Well, okay, he's dedicated his entire life now to this practice. So it makes sense that he's the one who's going to become the most powerful.
Yeah. It's like those 70s kung fu movies. He's just that guy who's always like training and fighting, and that's what he does, like all the time, 24/7. So we get the cool fight. Ken Ryu, Guile tries to uppercut Old Bison, but he teleports away. He also uses his psychokinetic powers and levitates himself and other people and objects around. As you can see, he's pretty much got superpowers and feel invincible. E Honda fights Balrog, and go on to the end sequence here where Ken manages through his flashbacks to kind of overcome the brainwashing, and then Ken and Ryu team up to fight Bison.
Want to fight some great double team maneuvers by the two boys to try and take Bison down. One thing I think is hilarious
they also did
about
that in
this
the
movie,
Alpha video game, the special battle, where you can actually have the Ken Ryu versus Bison.
2 versus 1. And no, I was just going to say, one thing I find absolutely hilarious about this movie is the fact that so much of it is dedicated to Guile's journey and his quest to actually reach Bison. And by the time he gets there, he just gets his ass absolutely kicked. He doesn't even so much as lay a hand on him. He just gets absolutely destroyed.
That
I just
walking
thought it
guy
was
is
really
beating
funny.
him now. He's walking away again by the time he's driven there, so he must walk fairly fast.
Yeah, hilarious.
It's like the two who have a personal vendetta against Bison never touch him, because Chun-Li is out, knocked out with a coma, and Guile can't hit him. No, it's this random guy who Bison has been afraid of. He doesn't say it, but he's like, he knows about this individual, and that's the one who comes
from Dragon Ball, pretty much.
But it's like the two, as you were saying, the two who have a vendetta don't get to settle it with him.
But it is like the kind of first round, and later, this is like the setup of the characters, and they'll have many other clashes around the world, and
Yeah, it's just another day though for Ryu, because even after Bison's defeated and it's all celebration, he's just like, okay, pick up my bag, off to do the laundry, going to walk barefoot down a highway. And of course, though, when we're watching the end credits, there's always that little extra of Bison driving his truck, his Manosaur style big black truck.
Yeah, we'll get to that one. But surprise, Chun-Li is not dead, despite
she's not
having
dead.
Cheat over like a corpse when Guile walks in, is all scared. They do a bit of a trick there. But yeah, that end sequence is quite strange. Old Motormaster comes down the road, and it's like Terminator 2 with a T-1000 in the truck. And I have to think, surely they got this from Terminator 2, because why is he randomly in this black truck with those windows, and then he's like, going after Ryu? It's a bit of an odd sequence.
Somebody was like, hey, in the game, there's this fun side thing where you break cars apart. We need to add that somehow.
Yeah.
But then they do a freeze frame.
He's already kicked a window in earlier. We know he can do it. We've got to up the stakes now. He's going to jump higher and kick further to get into that truck cab. I think his bones are going to be fairly broken and crumpled after all that impact of this truck driving in him.
It's
just, I love the idea though that Bison is so angry that he's procured a truck. He's just going to run him over.
Someone who wasn't Bison, like someone else, maybe Sagat or Barrel. Why is it Bison who can teleport and fly and levitate objects? Why is he even driving a truck?
Oh, I just think
he's
it's something
so
to Sandra's
mad.
home happy.
He's so mad. He
He's
just
really
like killed some truck driver and stole his truck. So he landed his X-Men jet down the road and went, stuff it. I'll get a truck and just drive back there.
Like, he could just go and procure a firearm.
Anything.
But he's like, no, I need
He could
the
teleport into him like
validation.
the Flash and just vibrate his hand and kill someone if he wanted to.
He's like, no, I need the validation.
Yeah.
And you'll notice in front of him, he has a unique hood ornament. So he didn't just. This must be
it's the
like one of
Shadaloo
his trucks.
skull.
He's like, okay, give me the keys, and just goes off looking for.
I guess he stopped at the custom shop to get that hood ornament made. Well, maybe he carried it with him and put it onto the truck while he was out on the day.
What? I'm sure
Took it
because
off his hat.
he had a whole like little personal army, and you need logistics.
Yeah.
So he probably owns a fleet of these trucks.
Oh,
He's
yeah,
just
maybe
like,
he does.
all
Yeah,
right,
he's
I
got
need
a
to go
awesome
down to the
bike.
garage.
The fact that this whole scene has been witnessed once again by another one of these spy cyborgs kind of proves that they clearly haven't defeated them. Everything, all the
Yeah.
infrastructure is still up and running. Everything's fine for Shadow Law.
It's just a
he's
teaser, really,
literally
to show that there's more Street Fighter stories.
he's like half a mile back, slowly following Ryu, just like on this thing. Like, all right, is he within range? Do you have him on film yet? You do? Okay. And then he hits the gas. He's like, I need to record this. I need to have this footage.
I need to know what his stats were at the exact moment of impact.
Yeah,
His
it's a
pride
nutty
is
end
just
plus.
so wounded. He needs this on film.
He's a petty
Um,
man.
Well, we're going to wrap up here, guys. You got any closing thoughts about the Street Fighter cartoons or toys or the games in general?
It's an interesting property because it has so many unique elements to it. You know, this whole street fighting part, the military stuff involving Shadaloo and Bison, you know, all these really unique characters with their own skills and abilities that you haven't really seen before in a major property like this. So it's like it was kind of perfect because it lent itself to so much property, media property, but it's just like no one really knew where to take this. So you got so much weird stuff.
Yeah, it's a really unique phenomenon, and it is totally of its time as well. I mean, like 94, we were just obviously being hammered by Street Fighter content of kind of varying degrees of quality. I'd largely agree, and I think probably the three of us could agree that the animated series it may not hold up well, especially compared to other shows at the time, but it's by no means a really awful show. Like Johnny
It's
said, that Mortal
entertaining.
Kombat show. Yeah, it's just entertaining. Like the Mortal Kombat show was pretty bad. At least the Street Fighter show has
Yeah.
its moments. You can get a few laughs out of it. And you know, the movie, I'm sure like I've gushed over it enough. I absolutely just love the animated movie. It's a proper
beautiful
childhood
film.
favorite. As for the toys, I think I'd probably mentioned to you outside of this chat, like I got rid of a lot of my GI Joe related stuff a few years ago, and part of that was my Street Fighter 2 stuff. So the only kind of Street
Oh
Fighter stuff
man,
I
you're
have
not
these
from the
days are
streets,
these
Mark.
I still have though my SH,
There we
Big
go.
Arts, Chung Li and Ryu. These ones are actually from Street Fighter 5, I think, is what their character models are based on. But you know, it's close enough for me. And I see the
Got some
Jada one
Jada
there
over
and
there.
Badgers.
Oh,
I still haven't opened my one. He's sitting on the floor.
I love the Jada stuff. It's cheap comparatively to the SH figure arts, and
Yeah.
it's like
And it's better than Marvel
really,
Legends and the
really
accessories.
It
good
looks, to be
quality.
honest with you, from what I've seen, it looks just as good, really aesthetically, as does the SH Fig Arts. They're beautiful looking figures, and I'm
I hope they get
probably
to Blanca and Zangief and Honda. I want them.
that's my exact thought process, Johnny. I'm actually going to try
They'll
and
be
fill
towards
out
the
a
end because
few
there'll be a whole other
characters.
buck.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. But No, even if I could get a Dalcium and maybe a few others, I wouldn't mind just stocking out the Street Fighter
Yeah,
character
if you get
selection a little bit.
Dalsum, keep them away from your mutagens and keep them away from any kind of lab scientific equipment, or it will start mutating people left or right.
You know, see, the
just
thing
be
about
careful.
Dalcium is he'll make his arm go long and just like slip it under the
Yeah.
door and steal my
I mean,
shit.
That'd be really helpful if you're lying in bed and things, the TV remote or your snacks just out of reach, and like stretch your arm and get it.
There is an episode, I don't know if you got to it in the show.
Mhm.
He just has a nuclear bomb. He just
I haven't
has
got
one.
to that yet. I'll be watching that tomorrow.
It's just like, okay, Bison has control of my bomb. It's like, why do you have one?
Yeah, what do you have?
What is this man? Why is he so dumb half the time?
It's really bizarre how they, of all the characters Dalsum like in the games, he's like, he's an Indian fighter yogi from a poor village, and why they make him with scientists and other things is just completely nonsensical. It's totally opposite to everything of his character.
Yeah, so I like the property. I think the games are great. And they've kept themselves relevant. I know a lot of people who have been crazy for Street Fighter 6. Especially within the fighting scene, the fighting community, because there's a whole
Yeah, it's a
big
whole other
community
thing.
about it. The music wise, Street Fighter has been big on urban beats and music, and it's lent itself to a whole culture of hip hop that
Mm.
It's influenced hip hop music. Hip hop music has influenced the game. You get fighters who are dressed in various types of like Brazilian dancing outfits and other types of outfits. There are directions for it to go. Music is definitely one of the big ones. Urban
Yeah.
hip hop scene, all that kind of stuff. And it's like it's a good series. It had a good run. It still has a good run for a certain niche of a market. So I'm glad that I was around to see it at its height in the 90s, and now it's still going on.
And on that perfect note from Badger, we'll finish up there. And speaking of music and Brazilian, this little thing will take us out.